A CEO found a letter from a single pregnant mother he had fired. Upon reading it, he was shocked and ran after her desperately. A story that will move you. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you are watching from. The cold wind of July blew through the mirrored windows of the 32nd floor of the TechVision corporate building in the bustling Wall Street area. Michael Thompson adjusted his Italian tie while observing the chaotic traffic of New York City below, a grey mass of cars and buses crawling through the avenues like coagulated blood in the arteries of the metropolis. At 38, he had built a technology empire valued in the billions, but at that moment he felt the weight of every decision he had made to get there. "Mr. Thompson, the budget meeting has ended. The documents are on your desk," announced Sandra, his assistant for 10 years, with the carefully neutral tone she used on the toughest days. Michael nodded without turning around. He knew that tone. It was the same one she used when his decisions sent shockwaves through the company corridors. Today, he had fired 150 employees. Numbers. On a spreadsheet, statistics necessary to maintain the profit margin that shareholders demanded. He had learned long ago not to think about the people behind the numbers. It was easier that way. His presidential office was a monument to contemporary American success. Designer furniture, artwork from renowned national artists, a panoramic view stretching from Central Park to the distant suburbs. Everything calculated to impress, to demonstrate power. Every object there had been chosen not for aesthetic pleasure, but for the psychological impact it had on visitors and subordinates. Michael walked over to his mahogany desk, where an organized stack of reports awaited his attention. Sandra always left everything impeccably arranged, each document in its specific place. But something was different today. Among the official papers, there was a crumpled sheet that clearly did not belong to that meticulous order. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, written with a cheap blue pen that skipped in some places. The paper, a piece torn from a common notepad, exuded a subtle perfume. Something floral and sweet, but clearly from a drugstore, not from an expensive perfume shop like those his ex-girlfriends frequented. Michael furrowed his brow. How did this end up here? To the human. "Resources Department," the letter began. "My name is Sarah Johnson, Employee ID 4521, Sustainable Projects Department. I am writing this letter because I could not speak to you in person after receiving my termination today." Michael stopped reading and checked the date. The letter was from today. He resumed reading, a strange tension growing in his chest. "I know the company is going through cuts, and I understand the business needs. I have worked here for 5 years and have always respected the board's decisions. But I need you to understand my situation. I am a single mother. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I am 6 months pregnant. My ex-partner left me when he found out about the pregnancy, and since then I have been struggling alone to support my family." Michael slowly sat down in his Italian leather chair. The words seemed to leap off the page, each one laden with a pain he was not accustomed to confronting. He continued reading, his breathing becoming slightly heavier. "I live in a 2-room apartment in Brooklyn, which costs $200 a month. With my salary here, I could pay the rent, basic expenses, and still have a little left for school supplies for Emma, my eldest daughter. She is very bright and dreams of being an engineer like her grandfather she never met. Without this job, I don't know how I will manage until the baby is born. Who will hire a 6-month pregnant architect?" Michael's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. He knew the numbers of the cuts. He had personally approved every affected department. Sustainable Projects was considered a secondary department by shareholders, despite the international awards they had been winning. To him, Sarah Johnson had been just a name on a list, an $80,000 annual saving in the budget. "I am not asking for charity," the letter continued, and Michael could almost hear the wounded pride in the imaginary voice of the woman. I am asking for an opportunity. I can work part-time. I accept a salary reduction. I can even work remotely in the last months of my pregnancy. I have ongoing projects that I know better than anyone in the company. The Green Living Residential Project, which I presented last month, has the potential to revolutionize the sustainable construction market in America. Michael stopped reading. He vaguely remembered that project. He had skimmed through its reports a few weeks ago. Something about recycled materials and energy efficiency. At the time, he had considered it interesting but not a priority. Now he tried to recall more details, but his memory only held numbers and profit projections. My daughter Emma asked me yesterday why I was crying after I got home, the letter continued, and Michael felt a strange pang in his stomach. I told her it was just fatigue. How can I explain to an 8-year-old that her mother's job, which she has always admired so much, simply ceased to exist overnight? How can I explain that we might have to move back in with my cousin in Newark, sharing a room with 4 other people? Michael abruptly stood up, walking over to the window. Below, the city's movement continued relentlessly. Millions of people fighting for survival, for dignity, for a better future for their children. He had always prided himself on being above that struggle, on having won the game. But the words of that unknown woman were making cracks in his emotional armor. I don't know if this letter will reach the right people, Sarah concluded. Maybe it's just the outpouring of a desperate woman. But if someone reads this, I want them to know that I will not give up. I will find a way to take care of my daughters. With or without Tech Vision, I just wish it were with you, because this company has been my second home, and these people, my co-workers, have been my second family. The letter ended with a simple signature. Sarah Johnson, followed by her phone number scrawled in the same faded blue pen. Michael remained motionless in front of the window for long minutes. 32 floors below, real life was happening. People like Sarah struggling for every dollar, every opportunity, every moment of dignity. He had isolated himself so much from this reality that the letter felt like it came from another planet. For the first time in years, Michael Thompson, the most feared CEO in New York City, felt something he couldn't define. It wasn't guilt. He had no time for luxuries like guilt. It was something deeper, more disturbing. It was the realization that his decisions had faces, had stories, had consequences that extended far beyond profit and loss charts. He returned to his desk and reread the letter 2 more times. With each reading, the details became more vivid. The apartment in Brooklyn, the 8-year-old daughter with dreams of engineering, the lonely pregnancy, the wounded pride of a woman who preferred to work rather than beg for charity. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Mr. Thompson, the board is waiting for you in the conference room, the quarterly results presentation. 5 minutes, Sandra, he replied, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. Michael carefully folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of his desk, next to the Patek Philippe watch he had bought to celebrate his first billion. For some inexplicable reason, that crumpled piece of paper felt more valuable than any object in his office. As he walked to the meeting, a single question hammered in his mind. Who was Sarah Johnson, and why had her words managed to penetrate decades of emotional armor to touch something he thought he had buried forever? The elevator descended silently, taking him to yet another meeting about numbers and strategies. But for the first time in his career, Michael Thompson was thinking about people. 3 days had passed since Michael found the letter, and he couldn't get it out of his mind. During morning meetings, while analyzing productivity graphs and listening to reports on international expansion, his mind wandered to that crumpled sheet of paper tucked away in his drawer. The The sweet and simple perfume still seemed to linger on the paper, creating an olfactory memory that haunted him at unexpected moments. It was Thursday, and the typical winter rain of New York City was tapping against the office windows when he finally made a decision. He needed to know more about Sarah Johnson. It wasn't morbid curiosity or guilt, at least that's what he told himself. It was business necessity. As CEO, he should know his employees better, especially those with innovative potential like the green living project she had mentioned. "Sandra," he called through the intercom, "I need you to bring me the personnel file of a former employee, Sarah Johnson, from the Sustainable Projects Department." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sandra had known Michael long enough to know he never cared about individual employees, especially those who had been let go. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Should I request any specific justification from HR?" "Tell them it's for post-termination performance analysis. Something about process optimization." The lies came. Easily, a skill refined over years in the corporate world. 20 minutes later, a manila folder rested on his desk. Michael opened it with a strange sense of anticipation, as if he were about to violate something sacred. The first thing he saw was a 3x4 photo attached to the hiring form. A woman with delicate features, wavy brown hair pulled into a casual bun, dark eyes that seemed intelligent, yet cautious. She wore a simple white blouse and smiled politely at the camera, but Michael could sense a subtle tension in her expression, as if she were always preparing to disappoint or be disappointed. Sarah Johnson, 32 years old, originally from New York City, graduated in architecture from Presbyterian University with a specialization in urban sustainability. Single, one minor child. Address, 847 Glory Street, Apartment 23, Brooklyn. Michael knew that area, a lower middle-class neighborhood where Asian immigrants had created a small community decades ago, now mixed with Americans seeking more affordable rents in the city center. The professional history revealed an impressive trajectory. Before TechVision, she had worked in 3 small architecture firms, always in the area of sustainable projects. Her performance evaluations at the company were consistently high. Dedicated and innovative employee, demonstrates exceptional initiative in creative solutions, natural leadership in collaborative projects. Michael frowned as he read the comments from her direct supervisor, David Smith. Sarah has a unique vision of sustainable architecture that could position TechVision as a leader in the green market in the US. I strongly recommend her promotion to Special Projects Coordinator. The recommendation was dated 2 months ago. Michael vaguely remembered David mentioning something about promotions in the department, but at the time he was focused on preparations for a merger with an American company and had delegated those minor decisions to HR. He continued flipping through the file. There were copies of projects signed by her, a residential condominium in New Jersey that reduced energy consumption by 40% through bioclimatic design, a public school renovation in East Harlem that transformed a deteriorated building into a benchmark for educational sustainability. The projects were technically solid and visually impressive, combining functionality with environmental responsibility in a way that Michael, even not being an architect, could recognize as exceptional. But it was the last document that made him stop breathing for a few seconds. It was a project proposal dated the week before her termination. Green Living, Sustainable Housing for the Affordable Housing Initiative. The document had 43 pages of detailed analyses, financial projections, environmental impact studies, and potential partnerships with... Raphael read the executive summary with growing interest and horror. Sarah proposed a revolution in affordable housing construction in the United States, using locally sourced recycled materials, designs that reduced energy costs by 60%, and a rainwater harvesting system that could be replicated on a national scale. The project had the potential to generate profits of hundreds of millions of dollars while addressing genuine social issues, and he had fired the woman who created it. Raphael leaned back in his chair, feeling a strange weight in his chest. He picked up the phone and dialed David Smith. The conversation that followed confirmed his worst fears. "David, I need information about the Green Living Project. Why hasn't it reached my desk?" David's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Thompson, I tried to schedule a presentation 3 times last month. Your secretary said you were too busy with the American merger and that affordable housing projects weren't a strategic priority at the moment." Raphael closed his eyes. He vaguely remembered those scheduling attempts, but he had instructed Sandra to cancel any meeting that wasn't absolutely critical to the business with the Americans. And Sarah, how did she react when she learned about the termination? There was a long pause. "Sir, can I be frank? Sarah cried in my office for 15 minutes. Not for herself. She said she would manage. She cried because she wouldn't be able to see the Green Living Project implemented. She said she had worked on it for 2 years and was sure it could change the lives of millions of Americans." Raphael hung up without saying goodbye. His throat felt strangely dry. That night, driving his BMW through the wet streets of the city, he found himself veering off his usual path to Soho, where he lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Without consciously thinking about it, he was heading toward Brooklyn. Glory Street was exactly as he had imagined, a chaotic mix of small Asian shops, modest residential buildings from the 1980s, and the constant flow of people returning from work. Raphael parked in front of a Japanese restaurant and observed the number 847. A 6-story building, peeling paint, intercom at the entrance that clearly hadn't worked in years. He didn't know what he was doing there. He had no plans to meet Sarah or talk to her. It was as if a magnetic force had drawn him to that place where she fought daily for survival, while he made decisions that affected her life from his fortified office on the 32nd floor. A pregnant woman exited the building at that moment, holding the hand of a curly-haired girl. Raphael felt his heart race. Could it be her? But when the woman turned under the streetlight, he saw that she didn't resemble the photo in the file. Still, he watched the two walk down the street, the girl jumping in puddles while the tired-looking mother smiled. Raphael stayed there for an hour, watching life unfold in that neighborhood that was a parallel universe to his own. He saw men returning from work in company uniforms, women carrying grocery bags, children playing on the sidewalk under the watchful eyes of their parents. It was a real community where people knew each other, helped one another, and formed bonds that went beyond financial transactions. When he finally returned home, Raphael knew that something fundamental had changed within him. For the first time in his adult life, he had witnessed the human consequences of his business decisions, and for some reason he couldn't explain. He needed to do something about it. That night, he reread Sarah's letter once more before going to sleep. In the silence of his luxurious apartment, surrounded by expensive artwork and designer furniture, the simple words of that unknown woman echoed like a call to something he had lost long ago: his own humanity. Sarah Johnson didn't know it, but she had planted a seed in seemingly barren ground, and that seed was beginning to sprout. The Basilico Café in Soho had always been a refuge for those seeking a cozy atmosphere away from the frantic pace of the business district. With its exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and the constant aroma of freshly brewed artisanal coffee mixed with the scent of pastries baking, it was the kind of place that Michael Thompson usually avoided. Too alternative, too real for his refined taste. But it was exactly there that Sarah Johnson spent her mornings, according to the discreet information he had managed to gather. 3 weeks had passed since he found the letter, and Raphael could no longer ignore the need to see her in person, not to talk to her. He still didn't know what he would say, just to put a real face to that desperate voice that haunted him. It was 8:30 on a grey Tuesday morning when Raphael parked his BMW on Harmony Street. He had swapped his usual Italian suit for dark jeans and a dress shirt without a tie, his version of a disguise that still cost more than the monthly salary of many Americans. He entered the cafe with his heart racing strangely. The atmosphere was exactly as he had imagined. Young professionals typing on laptops, artists sketching in notebooks, the low buzz of conversations in English mixed with snippets of Spanish from freelancers serving international clients. Raphael ordered a double espresso and chose a table at the back, where he could observe without being noticed. And then he saw her. Sarah was sitting at a table near the window, surrounded by scattered papers, architectural plans, and a laptop that had clearly seen better days. Her pregnancy was much more evident now. She must have been almost 7 months along. And Raphael noticed how she instinctively protected her belly whenever someone passed too close to her table. She wore a simple navy blue dress, probably bought at one of those maternity stores, in popular shopping areas, and a beige knitted coat that had seen better days. Her brown hair was tied up in a loose bun, with some strands escaping and framing her concentrated face. She wore no makeup, except for a subtle pink lipstick that she occasionally bit when she was deep in thought. Michael watched, fascinated as she worked. Her hands moved with precision over the architectural designs, making notes in careful handwriting. Every now and then, she paused to take a slow sip of her latte, clearly savoring each sip to make it last longer, before returning to lean over the projects. "Another coffee, Sarah?" asked the barista, a young woman with colourful hair and a genuine smile. "I haven't finished this one yet, Emily," Sarah replied with a smile that tried to mask her embarrassment. "But thank you." Michael noticed the delicacy of the situation. Sarah was clearly stretching her coffee to justify occupying the table for hours. It was both humbling and dignified. She maintained her professional dignity even in difficult circumstances. Emily, the barista, returned a few minutes later with a pastry on a small plate. "The kitchen made too many today. It will go to waste if you don't eat it," she gently lied. "You're doing me a favor by taking it." Sarah hesitated for a moment, and Michael saw the internal struggle in her eyes, the pride battling against the need. The need won. "Thank you, Emily. You're an angel." The scene touched something deep within Michael. He was witnessing a network of female solidarity operating through small gestures and kind lies, a world where dignity was preserved through disguised compassion. It was completely different from the male corporate universe he inhabited, where favors always came with explicit or implicit costs. Michael ordered another coffee and continued to observe. Sarah was working on what appeared to be small residential renovation projects. He could see plans for small apartments, notes on sustainable materials, detailed budgets handwritten. It was clearly freelance work, the kind of project that paid little but kept the bills paid. But then she opened a different folder, and Michael saw something that made him lean forward. They were the designs for the Green Living project, but modified, expanded, refined. Even working alone, without company resources, Sarah was still developing her revolutionary idea for sustainable, affordable housing. She was redesigning the apartments to be 20% smaller without losing functionality, calculating how this would reduce costs without compromising comfort. There were notes on new suppliers of recycled materials she had discovered, potential partnerships with recycling cooperatives, ideas for crowdfunding. Michael felt a strange mix of admiration and horror. This woman, fired by his decisions, pregnant and struggling financially, was still trying to save the world through sustainable architecture. She had not given up on her dream, even when all institutional resources had been denied to her. At that moment, Sarah's phone rang. She answered in a low voice, clearly trying not to disturb the other cafe patrons. "Hello, Emma," she said, and Michael realized it was her daughter. "What do you mean she's sick? Fever?" The immediate concern in her voice reminded Michael that Sarah was not just a talented professional or a pregnant woman fighting for survival. She was a mother of an 8-year-old who depended entirely on her. "No, sweetheart, you don't have to go to school if you have a fever," Sarah continued, her voice taking on that universal maternal tone. "Stay in bed, take the medicine Aunt Maria left on the nightstand. Mummy will finish up here quickly and come home, okay?" Michael saw Sarah looking at the projects spread out in front of her with a conflicted expression. She clearly needed to work. These freelance projects were probably her only source of income at the moment, but her daughter was sick and alone at home. The conversation continued for a few minutes, Sarah trying to calm Emma over the phone while simultaneously organizing her papers. When she finally hung up, she remained still for a moment, staring out the cafe window with an expression of deep fatigue that went far beyond physical tiredness. Michael watched her carefully put away all the documents in the folder, close her old laptop, and signal to Emily. She paid for the coffee. Michael saw her counting coins before leaving the money on the table, and slowly stood up, one hand supporting her back, in a gesture that revealed the discomfort of advanced pregnancy. As Sarah passed by his table on her way out, Michael could once again smell that sweet and simple scent that had permeated the letter. Up close, he noticed small details that distance had not revealed. Her carefully tended nails, but without polish, the small silver earring that was probably one of the few pieces of jewelry she owned, the way she walked with determination, despite her evident fatigue. Michael stayed in the cafe for another hour after Sarah left, trying to process what he had witnessed. This was not the experience he had expected. He had imagined that seeing her in person would lessen the emotional impact of the letter, that reality would be less dramatic than his mental projections. The opposite happened. Seeing Sarah in person, observing her silent dignity, her professional dedication, even in adverse circumstances, her immediate maternal concern when her daughter needed her, all of this made her situation even more real and urgent. Michael left Café Central with an increasing certainty that he needed to do something. He didn't know exactly what, but he could no longer passively observe while a woman with Sarah's talent and determination fought alone against obstacles he had the power to remove. Driving back to the office, Michael began to formulate a plan. It was risky, complicated, and would require more emotional delicacy than he was used to exercising. But for the first time in years, he was motivated by something beyond profit and business growth. He was motivated by the possibility of redemption. General Hospital had always been a place Michael had carefully avoided. Public hospitals represented everything he had fought to leave behind. Endless lines, chaotic bureaucracy, the smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with sweat and anxiety. But it was exactly there that his steps led him on a Thursday morning, 4 weeks after seeing Sarah at the cafe. He hadn't planned to be there. He had spent the week trying to figure out a discreet way to help Sarah without revealing his identity, perhaps through an anonymous job opportunity or a fictional project that would justify a generous payment. But all attempts had failed. Sarah had a keen intuition for situations that were too good to be true, and rejected any proposal she couldn't fully verify. It was Sandra who inadvertently gave him the information that brought him there. During a conversation about medical benefits for former employees, she mentioned that some laid-off workers still use the company's health plan in the first months until they found alternatives. Michael requested a list of those individuals for auditing purposes, and Sarah's name was on it. Now, sitting on the uncomfortable bench in the waiting room of the obstetrics department, Michael felt completely out of place. His Hugo Boss suit clashed starkly with the simple clothing of the other people waiting, pregnant women accompanied by husbands, mothers, friends, nervous men flipping through old magazines, small children running between chairs under the tired gaze of their parents. The smell was exactly as he remembered from the hospitals of his childhood. Strong disinfectant trying to mask less pleasant odors, bad coffee brewing for hours, the indefinable aroma of human anxiety. Michael checked his watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. According to the information he had gathered, Sarah had an appointment scheduled for that time. "Sarah Johnson, room 7, announced a tired nurse over the crackling loudspeaker. Michael lifted his head and saw her. Sarah walked slowly down the hallway, one hand resting on her belly, which now looked enormous under the simple dress she wore. She was alone, carrying a folder with medical documents and a floral fabric bag that was clearly homemade. Her shoes were worn black flats, probably the only ones that still fit her swollen feet. She stopped in front of the doctor's office. Dor took a deep breath, a gesture that Michael interpreted as someone preparing for bad news, and entered. The door closed behind her with a dull sound. Michael remained there, motionless, not fully understanding why he had come. What did he expect to achieve, sitting in a hospital waiting room? What kind of morbid voyeurism was this? 15 minutes passed before the office door opened again. Sarah emerged, accompanied by a middle-aged doctor with a tired face, who spoke in a low but clearly concerned tone. "Sarah, you need to understand the seriousness of the situation," said Dr. Anderson, reading his name. "On the badge, your blood pressure is consistently high, you've lost weight when you should be gaining, and the tests show signs of fetal distress. You need complete rest for the next few weeks." "Doctor," Sarah's voice sounded controlled but tense. "I understand your concerns, but I have an 8-year-old daughter and I need to work. I can't just stop." "Sarah," the doctor gently interrupted, "if you don't rest now, you could lose the baby. It's that simple. Your body is clearly signaling that it can't handle this routine anymore." Michael watched Sarah lean against the wall, her face losing color. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to process the doctor's words. It was like watching someone receive a death sentence, not physical, but financial and emotional. "But I can't stop working," she whispered. "How will I pay the rent? How will I buy food for Emma? My ex-company's health plan expires next month, and I don't have money for private consultations." Dr. Anderson ran a hand through his graying hair, clearly frustrated by having to deal with the cruel socio-economic reality affecting his patients. "Sarah, I'll be honest with you. I've seen many women in your situation. I know it's impossible to choose between the baby's health and providing for your family, but you need to find a way to reduce stress and physical effort, or the consequences could be irreversible." Michael observed Sarah struggle to maintain her composure. She thanked the doctor with a choked voice, scheduled a follow-up for the next week, and slowly walked toward the exit. As she passed by Michael, he could see unshed tears in her eyes, which she refused to let fall in public. He followed her at a safe distance. Sarah stopped at the women's restroom, and Michael waited in the hallway, hearing muffled sounds that were clearly sobs. When she came out, she had washed her face and composed herself, but her eyes were red. Sarah walked to the scheduling desk, where a staff member handed her a list of tests for the upcoming weeks. Michael saw Sarah mentally calculating the costs. He recognized the expression of someone doing impossible math in their head, trying to find money that didn't exist. "Can I pay for the tests in installments?" she asked quietly. "Unfortunately not, ma'am," the staff member replied with genuine but helpless sympathy. "But we have a social assistance program. If you'd like, I can schedule an evaluation." "No, thank you," Sarah quickly interrupted. Even in desperation, her pride wouldn't allow her to accept institutional charity. "I'll figure it out." Michael followed her to the hospital exit. Outside, Sarah sat on a bench in the square in front of the building, finally allowing the tears to fall freely. She took her cell phone out of her bag and dialed a number. "Maria?" she said when someone answered. "It's me, Sarah. Can I talk to Emma?" Pause. "Hi, my love. How are you feeling?" Another pause, and Sarah smiled through her tears. "I'm glad your fever has gone down. Mommy will take a little longer to get there, okay? Just keep watching cartoons." The conversation continued for a few minutes, Sarah visibly making an effort to sound cheerful and calm for her daughter. When she hung up, she remained motionless on the bench, staring at the city's movement without really seeing it. Michael observed from the entrance of the hospital, feeling a complex mix of emotions he couldn't name. Anger at himself for creating this situation. Frustration at not knowing how to help without revealing who he was. Admiration for the strength of a woman facing the possible collapse of her life without losing her maternal tenderness. But most importantly, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine responsibility for another human being. Sarah finally stood up, adjusted her bag, and began walking toward the bus stop. Her steps were slow, heavy, but determined. Michael watched her board a crowded bus heading to Brooklyn, gripping the handrail tightly as the vehicle pulled away amid the chaotic traffic of New York City. At that moment, standing on the sidewalk in front of the General Hospital, Michael Thompson made a decision that would change the course of his life. He could no longer be just a passive observer. Sarah Johnson had become his responsibility, whether she wanted it or not. He had resources, connections, power. It was time to use them for something that truly mattered. Michael took his phone out of his pocket and dialed Sandra. "Cancel all afternoon meetings," he said when she answered, "and I want a list of all ongoing sustainable architecture projects in the city. Real projects with approved budgets and set timelines." "Any specific criteria, Mr. Thompson?" Michael looked in the direction where Sarah's bus had disappeared. "Projects that need a consultant specialized in sustainable, affordable housing. Someone with exceptional talent and immediate availability." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes," Michael replied, his voice carrying a determination that Sandra hadn't heard in years. "I want it to be anonymous, completely anonymous. No one can know that TechVision or I are involved." For the first time in his career, Michael Thompson was about to use his business power to save a life instead of maximizing profits. And he would soon discover that this decision would transform him as much as it would transform Sarah. Michael's office was shrouded in the typical twilight of late afternoons in New York City when Sandra knocked on the door, bringing the folder he had requested. 3 days had passed since the meeting at the hospital, and Michael had barely slept, obsessed with finding a way to help Sarah without exposing his identity. "I found 7 projects that fit your criteria, Mr. Thompson," Sandra said, placing an organized folder on the table. "All are affordable housing developments focused on sustainability, with approved budgets ranging from $2 to $15 million. Michael opened the folder and began examining the documents. There were projects from the New York City Council, some international NGOs, private construction companies with social responsibility programs. All needed specialized consulting in sustainable architecture for low-income housing. "This one looks promising," Michael murmured, pointing to a project from the Affordable Housing Initiative. 500 housing units in East Harlem, budget of $12 million, 18-month timeline. It's led by Dr. Carmen Roberts, Sandra added. An architect from Spain, working in the US for 15 years, impeccable reputation, several international awards. Michael nodded. It was perfect. A serious organization, with a robust budget, led by someone who would value real talent over political connections. I want a meeting with her tomorrow, anonymously. What do you mean, anonymously? Create an identity for me. An investor interested in social projects, something like that. Use the holding RMG Investments. Michael had created this company a few years ago for discreet personal investments. And Sandra, this stays strictly between us. Sandra made a note, accustomed to her boss's eccentricities, but clearly intrigued. In 10 years working for Michael, she had never seen him interested in social affordable housing projects. The next morning, Michael met with Dr. Carmen Roberts at a discreet cafe in the West Village. She was a 50-year-old woman, with grey hair pulled back into a practical bun, intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything around her. She wore simple yet elegant clothes, and Michael noticed calluses on her hands, signs of someone who not only designed buildings, but also personally oversaw the work. "Mr. Thompson, is that right?" Carmen asked, checking her notes. Michael had decided to use his real last name. It was common enough not to raise immediate suspicion. "Exactly. Thank you for agreeing to meet me on short notice, Dr. Roberts. I'm a private investor interested in projects that combine social impact with environmental sustainability." Carmen leaned forward, clearly interested. "And what specifically brought you to the East Harlem project?" Michael had prepared for this question. "I believe sustainable affordable housing is the future of urban development in the US. I want to invest in projects that serve as replicable models." "Interesting," Carmen murmured. "Most private investors shy away from affordable housing. Low margins, complex bureaucracy, limited financial returns." "Not every return needs to be financial," Michael replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. Carmen smiled for the first time. "That's a refreshing perspective. Well, the East Harlem project is ambitious. 500 units using 70% recycled materials, rainwater harvesting system, shared solar energy. The challenge is finding a consultant with specific expertise in adapting sustainable technologies for low income." "What kind of expertise?" "Someone who understands the economic limitations of the families who will live there. Many architects design beautiful green homes that are too expensive to maintain. We need someone who thinks about real sustainability, both environmental and financial." Michael felt his heart race. Carmen was describing exactly the skills of Sarah. "What if I told you I know someone like that?" Carmen's eyes lit up. "That would be a godsend. We've been struggling for months. The large consultancies don't understand the target audience, and the smaller professionals lack experience with projects of this scale. The person I'm thinking of has 5 years of experience in sustainable projects, specializes in affordable housing, and developed an innovative concept called green living." Carmen stopped drinking her coffee. Sarah took a sip of her artisanal coffee. "Green living. I've heard of that project. It was presented at a sustainable architecture conference last year. Impressive work." Michael masked his surprise. Sarah had publicly presented her project. "Do you know the author?" "Not personally, but I know she works, or used to work, for a tech company here in New York City, Tech Vision, if I'm not mistaken." Michael maintained a neutral expression with considerable effort. "Interesting coincidence. Can I try to contact this person?" "If you can bring her into our project, that would be fantastic. I can offer $40,000 for the initial 6 months of consulting, with the possibility of extension. It's a fair amount for the market." Michael did some mental calculations. $40,000 over 6 months would give Sarah financial stability, even after. The baby was born, allowing her to follow medical recommendations for rest. It was perfect. "I'll reach out and get back to you in a few days," Michael said, trying to contain the satisfaction in his voice. "Excellent. Oh, and Mr. Thompson, your discretion regarding this project is crucial. We have some competitors who would love to sabotage our work." Michael smiled ironically. If Carmen knew who he really was, she would understand that discretion was his specialty. That afternoon, back at the office, Michael instructed Sandra to create a complete corporate identity for RMG Investments. Professional website, business address, verifiable references, everything a cautious consultant like Sarah would require before accepting a project. The next step would be the most delicate: to make Sarah receive a job proposal that seemed absolutely legitimate without raising suspicions about the real origin of the opportunity. Michael spent the night mentally crafting every detail of the plan. There were risks. If Sarah discovered the truth, she would probably hate him even more than she already did. But he could no longer ignore the fact that he had the power to change her life and that his inaction would be a form of cruelty. For the first time in years, Michael Thompson was using his strategic intelligence to create something instead of destroy. And he would soon discover that this change of direction would be irreversible, fundamentally transforming not only Sarah's life but who he was as a person. The game had begun. Now he needed to play it perfectly because the stakes were higher than any deal he had ever closed. It was not just about money or business success. It was about redemption. The call came on a rainy August morning when Sarah was at her makeshift desk in the living room of her apartment, trying to juggle the laptop that insisted on overheating with a renovation project for a bakery in the Upper West Side. Emma had left for school after having breakfast with toast and butter. Again. And Sarah was battling morning sickness that at 7.5 months pregnant still occasionally plagued her. The phone rang with an unknown number from New York City. Sarah hesitated. Lately, most calls were from debt collectors or loan offers that she couldn't accept, but something compelled her to answer. "Sarah Johnson?" asked a professional female voice. "Yes, this is she. My name is Beatrice Anderson. I'm an assistant to Dr. Carmen Roberts from the Affordable Housing Initiative. We would like to discuss a consulting opportunity in sustainable architecture." Sarah almost spilled the lukewarm milk coffee she was holding. She knew the work of Carmen Roberts, one of the most respected architects in the field of social housing in the United States. "Consulting opportunity?" "Yes. We have a project for 500 housing units in East Harlem and need a consultant specializing in sustainable, affordable housing. Your name was recommended by an investor in the project." Sarah's heart raced, but her recent experience with disappointments made her cautious. "Recommended by whom?" "RMG Investments. They are familiar with your work on the Green Living Project and thought you would be perfect for our needs." Sarah furrowed her brow. She didn't know any RMG Investments, and few people knew the details of Green Living. "Can I know how they obtained my contact information?" "It was provided by the investor, who said he had access to your professional portfolio through industry contacts." Beatrice sounded slightly surprised by Sarah's level of caution. "If you prefer, I can email you all the information about the project and the company. You can verify everything before deciding if you're interested." Sarah agreed. Over the next 2 days, she obsessively investigated everything about the Affordable Housing Initiative, Carmen Roberts, and RMG Investments. The NGO was legitimate, with documented projects throughout Latin America. Carmen had an impeccable resume and international recognition. RMG Investments was more mysterious, a small but seemingly solid holding company with some investments in social and environmental projects. What convinced her the most was the technical detailing of the project. Whoever had drafted those specifications understood the complexities of sustainable, affordable housing deeply. It wasn't a scam. Scammers didn't invest that much time in legitimate architectural details. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at the NGO's headquarters in a modest commercial building in the financial district. Sarah carefully chose her outfit, a black maternity dress that managed to look professional, a blazer borrowed from her cousin, and comfortable flats. She spent half an hour trying to conceal her dark circles with cheap foundation, wanting to make the best impression possible. Carmen Roberts greeted her personally, something Sarah hadn't expected. She was an impressive woman, small in stature, but radiating a quiet competence that filled Sarah with immediate respect. "Sarah, what a pleasure to meet you in person," Carmen said with a slight Spanish accent. "I saw your presentation on green living at the AIA conference last year. Very smart work." Sarah felt her face flush. "Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I still believe strongly in that concept." "And you should. It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need for the East Harlem project." Carmen led her to a conference room where blueprints covered a large table. It was the most ambitious project Sarah had ever seen. 500 houses arranged in community modules with integrated green spaces, a shared water treatment system, and collective solar panels that would drastically reduce the energy costs for the residents. "The challenge," explained Dr. Roberts, "is to make this financially viable for families with incomes between 2 and 4 minimum wages. We need someone who understands both sustainable technology and the real economic limitations of these families." Sarah studied the plans, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Can I make some suggestions?" "Please." "This solar water heating system is oversized," Sarah pointed out, "with some modifications to the house designs, better positioned windows, lighter colors on the exterior walls. We can reduce energy demand by 30% and use a simpler, cheaper solar system." Dr. Roberts leaned in, intrigued. "Go on." "And here," Sarah indicated another area of the project, "you're using expensive recycled materials transported from afar. If we partner with local recycling cooperatives, we can use materials from the region itself for a third of the cost." For 45 minutes, Sarah spoke with increasing passion about optimizations, adaptations, and possible innovations. It was as if all the months of frustration and financial worry had been channeled into pure creative energy. Dr. Roberts took constant notes, occasionally interrupting with questions that showed she understood exactly the technical implications of Sarah's suggestions. "Sarah," Dr. Roberts finally said, "when can you start?" Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "Start?" "The work. $10,000 for the first 6 months of consulting, with the possibility of extension if all goes well. We can set up an office here at headquarters, or if you prefer to work from home due to your pregnancy, that's fine." Sarah felt unexpected tears burning her eyes. It was more money than she had made at TechVision to do exactly the work she had always dreamed of doing. "I can really work from home?" "Of course, we know you're pregnant and have a small child. Flexibility is important." Dr. Roberts smiled warmly. "By the way, our main investor made a point of mentioning that the schedule should accommodate your personal needs." Sarah blinked, confused. "The investor mentioned my personal needs?" "Yes," said he was aware of your situation and that it was important to ensure suitable working conditions. Dr. Roberts seemed to notice the strange expression on Sarah's face. "Is there a problem?" "No, it's just that I don't personally know anyone from RMG Investments. I wonder how they know about my situation. Dr. Roberts consulted her notes. Well, I assume they researched your professional background. Investment firms always do detailed due diligence. Sarah nodded, but something still bothered her. It was as if someone who knew her personally was behind this opportunity. But who and why? Can I have a few days to consider the proposal? She asked. Of course, but I hope you accept, Sarah. Honestly, you're exactly what this project needs. Leaving the meeting, Sarah walked through the streets of downtown with conflicting feelings. It was the professional opportunity of her life, arriving at the exact moment she needed it most. But there was something mysterious about the whole situation that made her uncomfortable. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to make the decision. She could continue doing small freelance projects that barely paid the bills, or accept a dream job that seemed too good to be true. In the end, practicality won. Emma needed stability. The baby was coming, and her health required less stress. If there were mysterious angels looking out for her, perhaps it was time to accept the help. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed Beatrice Roberts. I accept the proposal, she said when the assistant answered. What Sarah didn't know was that 32 floors above the city, Michael Thompson was sitting in his office at that very moment, looking out the window toward downtown, where she had just made the decision that would change both their lives forever. The plan had worked perfectly. Now came the hardest part, keeping the secret while watching Sarah thrive professionally and preparing for the arrival of the baby he, inexplicably, already felt was part of his responsibility. The scandal exploded on a September morning, like a bomb in the corporate world. Sarah was at her makeshift desk at home, finally working peacefully on the East Harlem project. 3 weeks into her new job, she had managed to balance professional demands with the needs of her advanced pregnancy when Emma came running home from school with a magazine in her hands. "Mom, look! The man in the magazine looks just like that uncle who was at the hospital the day you cried," exclaimed Emma, opening the cover of Business Weekly to the feature article. Sarah's blood ran cold. On the cover was a photo of Michael Thompson in his office, with the headline in bold letters, "The most powerful CEO in NYC, how Michael Thompson built a $15 billion empire." Sarah grabbed the magazine with trembling hands, her heart racing dangerously for a woman 8 months pregnant. "What uncle at the hospital, Emma?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "That handsome man who was sitting near where you walked out crying from the doctor. He kept looking at you leave and seemed sad too." Sarah felt the world spin around her. She quickly flipped through the magazine until she found more photos of Michael at business events, award ceremonies, meetings with politicians. It was impossible to deny. It was the same man Emma had seen at the hospital. The same man who had approved her dismissal from TechVision. "Emma, go to your room and do your homework," Sarah said in a tense voice. "But Mom, you look pale. Are you feeling sick?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need to make an important call." As soon as Emma left, Sarah rushed to the computer and typed RMG Investments into Google. Now that she knew what to look for, it wasn't hard to find the connections. RMG were the initials of Michael Thompson. The company was one of his personal holdings, used for discreet investments. The nausea that hit her had nothing to do with her pregnancy. For weeks, she had felt grateful for an opportunity she thought she had earned on her own merit. Now she discovered she was the object of disguised charity from the very man who had dismissed her. A man who had destroyed his professional life. Sarah picked up the phone with trembling hands from rage and dialed. "Carmen Roberts." "Carmen, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you urgently about RMG Investments." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah, you sound upset. Is something wrong? Do you know who Michael Thompson is? Another pause, longer this time. The CEO of Vision Tech? Of course, everyone in the market knows him. Why? Because RMG Investments is his, and he's the one who fired me from Vision Tech 4 months ago. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Finally, Carmen spoke, her voice laden with gradual understanding. Oh, Sarah, I didn't know. He introduced himself as an anonymous investor interested in social projects. I was deceived. Sarah's voice trembled with contained anger. He's treating me like a charity project, a social experiment to ease his conscience. Sarah, wait. Don't make hasty decisions. Let's talk in person. No, Sarah interrupted. I can't continue with this project knowing it's funded by the guilt of the man who fired me while I was pregnant. It's humiliating. Sarah hung up the phone and sat heavily in the chair, her hands instinctively protecting her belly. The baby moved, as if sensing her agitation. For a moment, she allowed herself to cry, out of anger, shame, and emotional exhaustion, but the tears didn't last long. Sarah Johnson was not a woman to be brought down for long. If Michael Thompson thought he could manipulate her through false generosity, he had gravely underestimated who he was dealing with. She picked up the phone again, this time calling directly to Vision Tech. Sandra Parker, this is Sarah Johnson, former employee of the Sustainable Projects Department. I need to speak urgently with Mr. Michael Thompson. Sandra, trained to filter unwanted calls, hesitated. May I ask what this is regarding, ma'am? Tell him it's about RMG, Investments, and the East Harlem project. I'm sure he'll want to take the call. 15 minutes later, Sarah's phone rang. It was a number she recognized immediately, the direct line to the CEO's office at Vision Tech. Sarah? Michael's voice sounded tense, careful. So you know who I am, Sarah said, her voice colder than it had ever been in her life. I can explain. Explain what? How you fired me while I was 6 months pregnant and then decided to play God to relieve your guilt. How you stalked me, spied on me, manipulated my life as if I were a social experiment? Michael was silent for a few seconds. That's not how... How dare you? Sarah exploded, all her accumulated rage bursting forth at once. I spent months humiliating myself to get jobs for $500, selling jewelry at the flea market, counting coins to buy bread for my daughter, while you decided whether I deserved your pity or not. Sarah, please, let me explain. It wasn't pity, it was... What was it? Love? You don't even know me. I'm just an inconvenient guilt you decided to solve with money. Michael tried to speak, but Sarah didn't. Give him a chance. You know what's even more pathetic? I was starting to believe I had professional value again, that someone recognized my talent, that I deserved that opportunity. But no, it was just the billionaire playing savior with the poor employee he destroyed. Sarah, Michael's voice was now choked, you have professional value. You have extraordinary talent. That's why I... Shut up, Sarah shouted, and immediately worried about Emma in the next room. She lowered her voice to a venomous whisper. You don't have the right to validate my talent. You don't have the right to decide what I deserve or not. And most importantly, you don't have the right to play with my life and my daughter's. There was a long silence. Finally, Michael spoke in an almost inaudible voice. You're right. I overstepped. I manipulated the situation, and that was wrong. But Sarah, please don't give up on the project. Carmen and the families in East Harlem need you. They aren't to blame for my mistakes. Sarah hesitated. It was true. There were 500 families waiting for homes that she could help make better. But working knowing that Michael was behind it all would be unbearable. I will finish what I started, she finally said. But with one condition, you stay completely away. No RMG investments, no funding from you, no interference in my professional life. If Carmen finds other investors, I'll stay. If she doesn't, I'm out as soon as I deliver what I've already done. Sarah, and Michael, if I find out that you're following me, spying on me, or interfering in my life in any way, I will go to the police. It's stalking, it's harassment, and I won't tolerate it." Sarah hung up the phone before Michael could respond. Her hands trembled with anger and adrenaline. She had faced the most powerful man in New York City and made it clear that she would not be manipulated anymore. But even in her fury, a small part of Sarah wondered why someone would go to such lengths to help a stranger, and why, despite all her justified anger, there was something in Michael's voice that sounded like genuine pain, not just guilt. These questions would trouble her for the next few days, even as she refused to admit that Michael Thompson had become more than just the CEO who fired her. He had become a mystery she couldn't solve. The October rain fell heavily over New York City when Sarah felt the first contractions. It was 2 a.m. on a Monday, and she was alone in the apartment. Emma was sleeping soundly in the next room, oblivious to the drama beginning to unfold. The first contraction woke her like a fist tightening around her belly. Sarah looked at the clock, confused. There were still 3 weeks until the due date. The second contraction came 15 minutes later, stronger, radiating pain through her back and legs. When the i.e. third contraction arrived just 10 minutes after the second, and Sarah knew it was not a false alarm. She carefully got out of bed, trying not to panic. She had planned everything meticulously. Mary, the elderly neighbor, would take care of Emma when the time came. She would call an Uber to the general hospital. She had a bag ready for weeks. But the baby was coming too early in the middle of the night during a storm that made the streets of New York City look like a river. Sarah tried to call Mary first. Nothing. Then she called her cousin in Newark. The phone rang into the void. She tried 2 more friends. No one answered calls at 2 a.m. The fourth contraction doubled her over in pain. Sarah held onto the hallway wall, breathing as she had learned in her prenatal class, but panic was starting to take over. What if she couldn't get to the hospital? What if something went wrong with the premature baby? Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mom, why are you awake?" "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah tried to keep her voice calm. "The baby is coming. I need to go to the hospital." Emma's eyes widened, all sleepiness disappearing. "Now? But it's raining so hard." "I know, darling. You're going to stay here, and I'll call someone to take care of you." But who? Everyone she trusted was either sleeping or lived too far away to get there quickly. Sarah felt tears of despair start to form. How could such a simple situation, having a baby, become so complicated when she was alone? The fifth contraction was brutal. Sarah leaned against the wall, involuntarily groaning. Emma started to cry. "Mom, you're in pain. I'm scared." It was in that moment of total despair that the name popped into Sarah's mind. Michael Thompson. She knew he had resources, medical contacts, drivers available 24/7. More importantly, he had made it clear that he felt responsible for her, even if she rejected that responsibility. Sarah hated the idea. 2 weeks had passed since their furious phone conversation, and she had worked hard to erase Michael from her mind. Carmen had found other investors for the Soho project, and Sarah was determined to continue her professional life without any connection to him. But now, alone in the apartment at 2:30 in the morning, with contractions intensifying and an 8-year-old daughter terrified, her pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The 6th contraction nearly knocked her down. With trembling hands, Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed the number she had memorized, but vowed never to use again. Michael answered on the second ring. His voice sounded alert, as if he had already been awake. "Sarah, what happened?" I'm in labor," she said between heavy breaths. "It's too early, and I can't reach anyone to take care of Emma, and there are no taxis on the street because of the rain." "Where are you?" At home, Maple Street, 847, apartment 23. I'm on my way. Don't move. Don't do anything. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Michael, it's 2:30 in the morning. How are you going to get here in 15 minutes? Leave it to me. Just hang in there, okay? The call dropped. Sarah sat on the couch, Emma curled up beside her, both watching the rain pound against the apartment window. Part of Sarah still couldn't believe she had called Michael. Part of her was furious with herself for turning to exactly the person she had sworn to avoid. But most of Sarah was just scared and relieved to know help was on the way. 12 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Sarah dragged herself to the door, another contraction hitting her midway. When she opened it, Michael was there, completely soaked from the rain, holding a large umbrella and wearing an expression of concern she had never seen on his face. He was in jeans and a simple t-shirt. Clearly he had dressed in a hurry, but he had managed to bring a car with a driver waiting underneath, hazards on. "How are you?" were his first words, with no reference to the strange situation of seeing each other face to face for the first time. "The contractions are 5 minutes apart," Sarah replied, holding onto the wall as another wave of pain hit her. Michael looked at Emma, who was watching him with a mix of curiosity and fear. He crouched down to be at eye level with the girl. "Hi, Emma. I'm Michael. Your mom has told me a lot about you." Emma looked at Sarah, confused. Her mom had never mentioned knowing any Michael. "Emma, Michael is going to help take Mommy to the hospital," Sarah quickly explained, "and he's going to make sure you're safe too." "We're all going together," Michael said naturally. "Emma can't be left alone." In the next few minutes, Michael moved with impressive efficiency. He helped Sarah put on her coat, grabbed the hospital bag she had prepared, and found a backpack with clothes and toys for Emma. When Sarah had another strong contraction on the building stairs, he supported her without hesitation, his arm firm around her waist. The car was a black Mercedes with a professional driver. Michael had called the hospital during the ride, and a medical team was already waiting for them at the entrance of the maternity ward. Everything happened with a smoothness that only money and connections could provide. "How did you organize all this so quickly?" Sarah asked as they were taken to the delivery room. "Some perks of having chronic insomnia and a private medical team," Michael replied with a half-smile. "Dr. Henry Anderson is the best obstetrician in New York City. He's already on his way." During the hours that followed, Michael did something that surprised Sarah deeply. He stayed, not just at the hospital, but truly present. He kept Emma entertained in the waiting room, buying snacks, playing games on his phone, patiently explaining what was happening. It was happening when the girl became anxious from the cries of pain that occasionally echoed from the delivery room. At 6:47 in the morning, Sophia Johnson was born, weighing 7 pounds, perfectly healthy despite being 3 weeks early. When the nurse placed the baby in Sarah's arms, she cried. From relief, exhaustion, a pure joy that made all the problems of the past months seem insignificant. Michael entered the room some time later, Emma holding hands with him. The girl ran to see her little sister, marveling at the tiny fingers and dark hair just like hers. "She's beautiful," Emma said solemnly. "She looks like you, Mum." Michael stood at a respectful distance, but Sarah could see something in his eyes that touched her. It wasn't just satisfaction from having helped, it was something deeper, more personal. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. Michael nodded. "You're welcome. Yeah. She's perfect." In that moment, something changed irreversibly between them. Sarah still hadn't forgiven him for the manipulations. She still didn't fully trust him. But she couldn't deny that when she needed him. The most, Michael Thompson had been there, not as the powerful CEO or the manipulative billionaire, but as a man who genuinely cared about her well-being. And for the first time, Sarah began to wonder if there was more to Michael Thompson than she had assumed. Maybe he wasn't just the villain of her story. Perhaps there was something more complicated and human behind all his actions. The first month with Sophia was a whirlwind of sleepless nights, constant breastfeeding, and the kind of exhaustion Sarah hadn't experienced since Emma was a baby. But this time, she wasn't completely alone. Michael had become a constant, albeit careful presence in their lives. Initially, Sarah resisted. In the first days after the birth, she insisted she could manage on her own, that she didn't need help, that the flowers, diapers, and baby gear that mysteriously appeared at her apartment door were unnecessary. But the reality of caring for a newborn while recovering from childbirth and trying to pay attention to 8-year-old Emma soon forced her to accept that she needed support. Michael never forced his presence. He simply showed up at the right moments, when Emma needed a ride to school because Sarah was breastfeeding, when the diapers ran out and Sarah was too busy to go out, when Sophia cried inconsolably at 3 in the morning and Sarah was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It was during one of those difficult nights that Sarah finally let her guard down. Sophia had been colicky for 2 hours, and nothing Sarah did could soothe her. Emma had woken up to the crying and was sitting in the living room worried. Sarah was at her limit, exhausted, frustrated, feeling like an incompetent mother. When the doorbell rang at 3 in the morning, Sarah opened the door without even asking who it was. Michael was there, with 2 shopping bags and a concerned expression. "I heard the crying in the hallway," he said simply. "Can I help?" This time, Sarah didn't have the strength to protest. She let Michael in and watched, surprised, as he immediately went to Sophia, picking her up with a naturalness she hadn't expected. "Hi, Princess," Michael murmured, gently rocking Sophia. "What's going on? Tummy hurting?" To Sarah's astonishment, Sophia began to calm down almost immediately. Michael walked around the apartment with rhythmic movements, softly whispering to the baby, one hand carefully supporting her head. "How do you know how to do this?" Sarah asked, collapsing onto the sofa with relief. "I took care of my sister's kids when they were little," Michael replied, continuing to rock Sophia. "Babies like constant movement and a calm voice, and sometimes they just need a different person holding them." Sarah watched Michael with Sophia for almost an hour. He hummed softly, a tune she didn't recognize, but it had a hypnotic rhythm. His movements were confident, affectionate, natural. It wasn't the calculated performance of someone trying to impress. It was genuine. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah finally asked. Michael stopped walking, looking at her over Sophia's head, who was now peacefully asleep in his arms. "Because you need it," he said simply, "and because I want to help." "But why? Why do you care so much?" Michael hesitated for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more vulnerable than Sarah had ever heard. "Because when I read your letter, something changed in me. You wrote about dignity, about fighting for your daughters, about not giving up even when everything seemed lost, and I realized I had spent years making decisions that affected people like you without ever thinking about the real consequences." He carefully placed Sophia in the portable crib and turned to Sarah. "You made me remember what I used to be before I became the CEO everyone fears. You made me remember that there's something more important than profit and business growth." Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a mix of understanding and care that she wasn't prepared to feel for Michael Thompson. "And now?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Michael replied immediately. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah. I just want to be present, if you allow me. I want to be part of Sophia and Emma's lives, if they want me to be. I want to be someone you can trust." Emma, who had been listening from the bedroom door, entered the living room at that moment. Michael, she said with the seriousness of an 8-year-old, are you going to be Sophia's dad? The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Michael knelt to be at Emma's level. Emma, Sophia already has a wonderful mother who takes great care of her. I can't be anyone's dad without their mother wanting that too. But I can be a friend. I can be someone who will always be here when... Emma considered this for a moment. Like an uncle? Like an uncle, Michael agreed, smiling. Sarah watched the interaction with a tight heart. Emma had grown up without a father figure, and she always wondered if the girl missed that. Seeing Emma interact naturally with Michael stirred complicated feelings that Sarah didn't know how to process. In the weeks that followed, Michael became exactly what he had promised, a constant and reliable presence. He took Emma to school when Sarah was busy with Sophia. He brought groceries when shopping became difficult. He stayed with the girls when Sarah had medical appointments or needed to handle bureaucratic issues. But more importantly, he began to truly get to know who they were. He discovered that Emma loved math and dreamed of being an engineer, like the grandfather she had never met. He learned that Sophia was calmer when listening to classical music, but laughed when he made silly faces. He realized that Sarah was happier when talking about sustainable architecture, that she made the best coffee he had ever tasted, and that she had a unique way of seeing solutions where others saw only problems. And Sarah gradually began to see Michael not as the powerful CEO or the manipulator who had fired her, but as a man who was genuinely trying to be better. She noticed how he always asked for permission before helping, how he respected her boundaries, how he never tried to buy the girl's affection with expensive gifts. One night, when Sophia was 2 months old, Sarah found Michael in the kitchen washing the dishes she had let pile up. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair tousled, and he seemed completely at home in her small, modest apartment. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," Michael replied, continuing to wash the dishes. "But I want to." Sarah approached, grabbing a towel to dry the dishes. They worked in silence for a few minutes, a domestic and intimate rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "Michael," she finally said, "thank you for everything." He stopped washing and looked at her. "Thank you. Why?" "For letting me be part of this, for giving me a chance to be more than just a wealthy businessman, for showing me what really matters in life." In that moment, with Sophia sleeping in the next room and Emma doing homework at the table, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of a complete family. Not because Michael was there, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the world. The road to trusting him would still be long and complicated, but Sarah was finally willing to consider the possibility that Michael Thompson was not just a complication in her life. Perhaps he was a part of her she didn't know was missing. The school fair for Emma was in full swing when Sarah realized that her life had completely changed without her noticing. It was a warm June evening, almost 8 months after Sophia's birth, and the yard of Lincoln Elementary School had been transformed into a piece of rural America in the heart of New York City. Colorful bunting fluttered between the trees, paper lanterns cast a golden light over the food stalls, and the smell of spice cider, peanut candy and corn cake floated in the warm night air. Children ran between the tables, dressed as country folk, while parents gathered in small groups, chatting and laughing to the sound of an accordion playing on the makeshift stage. Sarah was sitting on a bench near the fishing booth, Sophia peacefully sleeping in her lap, watching Emma dance with her classmates. The girl was wearing a checkered dress that Sarah had sewn especially for the fair, a skill she'd learned from her mother years ago and only resurfaced on special occasions like this. "She looks beautiful," Michael said, approaching with 2 cups of steaming spice cider. Sarah accepted the drink, inhaling the aroma of cinnamon and clove that always reminded her of childhood. Michael sat down beside her, and she noticed that he had made an effort to dress appropriately for the occasion. Simple jeans, a checkered shirt, worn leather boots that looked genuinely used, not bought expensive at some designer store. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip of the spiced cider. "You seem different." "Different how?" Sarah studied him for a moment. Over the past few months, she had watched Michael gradually transform. The rigid, controlled man she had known through his business reputation had given way to someone more relaxed, more genuine. He was still clearly successful and powerful, but those traits no longer defined him completely. "You seem happy," she finally said. Michael smiled, a smile that reached his eyes in a way Sarah rarely saw before. "I am happy." They watched Emma finish her dance and run toward them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom! Michael, did you see how well I danced?" "You were perfect, Emma," Michael said. And Sarah noticed how naturally he had become part of the girls' family constellation. Not as a father substitute, Emma still fondly remembered her biological father despite his absence, but as a reliable and caring male figure who was always there when they needed him. "Can I take Sophia to show her to the teacher?" Emma asked, extending her arms for her little sister. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Sophia was only 8 months old and still too small to navigate through the crowd, but Michael offered to accompany Emma, and she accepted. Watching Michael walk through the schoolyard with his 2 daughters, because Sophia had become his daughter too, even if not biologically, Sarah felt a wave of emotion that surprised her. For so many years, she had struggled alone, carrying all the weight of maternal responsibilities. Laura had been lost in thoughts about financial decisions and daily worries. Now, for the first time, she had a genuine partner. Sarah. The cheerful voice of Dr. Carmen Roberts pulled her from her daydreams. The Spanish architect approached, accompanied by a few women Laura recognized as mothers of students from the school. "Carmen, I didn't know you would be here." "My niece Emma is in the same class as Sophia," Carmen explained, "and I took the opportunity to meet some of the families that will benefit from the East Harlem project." Laura smiled. The project had been completed with extraordinary success. The 500 houses were being built, following all the sustainable specifications she had proposed, and there was already a waiting list of other municipalities wanting to replicate the model. "How is the new project going?" Carmen asked. In the last 3 months, Laura had opened her own consultancy, Sustainable Architecture Johnson. With the money saved from her work in East Harlem and a few clients Carmen had referred, she managed to rent a small office space in Soho and was building a solid clientele of construction companies interested in eco-friendly projects. "Very well. In fact, better than I expected," Laura replied. "It seems there is finally real demand for what I do." "And what about Michael?" Carmen asked with a mischievous smile. "How are you two?" Laura felt her face flush slightly. "We are doing well. He has been very present in the girls' lives, and in yours." Before Laura could respond, Emma came running back, Michael right behind her, carrying Sophia, who was awake and looking around with curious eyes. "Mom, the teacher said Sophia is the prettiest baby at the party," Emma announced proudly. Michael handed Sophia back to Laura, and she noticed how his gaze lingered on her face. There was something different in his look over the past few weeks, a more personal, intimate intensity that made her question whether their feelings were evolving beyond mutual gratitude and care for the children. The music changed to a slower tune, and couples began to form in the center of the yard. Emma immediately grabbed Michael's hand. "Will you dance with me?" she asked with that childlike seriousness that still characterized her. "It would be an honor," Michael replied, bowing exaggeratedly, which made Emma giggle. Laura watched the two dance. Emma focused on the steps, Michael gently guiding her and clearly having a great time. Others around began to notice too, the well-dressed but unassuming man dancing with maternal care, with an 8-year-old girl, both laughing when she stepped on his feet. "They make a lovely family," commented one of the women with Carmen. "They do," Carmen agreed, looking meaningfully at Laura. When the music ended, Michael returned to Laura, Emma hanging onto his arm as if he were a giant toy. "Your turn," he said, extending his hand to Laura. "I haven't danced in years," Laura protested, but Emma immediately began to insist. "Come on, Mom, dance with Michael, I'll hold Sophia." Laura looked around. Dozens of couples were preparing for the next dance. The music was soft, romantic, and Michael still held out his hand with an expression that mixed invitation and challenge. "One dance," Laura finally said, handing Sophia to Carmen. Michael's hand was firm and warm when she accepted it. He guided her to the center of the yard, one hand on her waist, the other holding her hand with careful yet intimate respect. Laura could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne mixed with the aroma of spiced cider and the warm evening breeze. They moved together to the rhythm of the music, and Laura realized that Michael was a surprisingly natural dancer. There was none of the corporate stiffness she would have expected, just a solid and comforting masculine presence that made her feel protected and desired at the same time. "Sarah," Michael said softly, close enough for only she to hear, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you think it would be possible for us to be more than friends? More than an improvised family?" Laura's heart raced. She had wondered the same thing for weeks, but hearing Michael vocalize it changed everything. "Michael, I know our story started off complicated," he continued, gently spinning her as the music called for it. "I know I made serious mistakes in the beginning, but these last few months, Sarah, I've fallen in love, not just with you, but with this life we've built together, with Emma, with Sophia, with waking up in the morning knowing I'll see you." Laura felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "Are you sure? It's not just gratitude or responsibility?" Michael stopped dancing for a moment, holding her face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "Sarah Johnson, you are the strongest, smartest, and bravest woman I've ever met. You've completely transformed my life. You made me remember who I wanted to be before I got lost in success and power. Of course, I'm sure." Around them, others continued dancing, but Laura felt as if they were in a private bubble. The party music, the laughter of the children, the buzz of conversations, everything faded into the background for this defining moment between them. "And I've fallen for you too," Laura finally admitted. "Not for the billionaire CEO, but for the man who holds Sophia at 3 in the morning when she's colicky. For the man who taught Emma how to play chess. For the man who brought me coffee every day when I was too exhausted to leave the house." Michael smiled, that full smile that completely transformed his face. "So, can we try? Officially?" Laura looked around the schoolyard. Emma was sitting with Carmen, holding Sophia and pointing at them excitedly. Dozens of families were celebrating around them, hard-working, honest people, building simple yet fulfilling lives based on love, community, and mutual commitment. It was exactly the kind of life she had always wanted, and for the first time it was within her reach. "Yes," she said, "we can try." When Michael kissed her there, amidst a school fair in New York City, with the scent of spiced cider in the air and the sound of an accordion in the background, Sarah knew she had found something she didn't know she was searching for. Not just love, but belonging. A family built not on obligations or convenience, but on mutual choice and genuine care. Years of struggle had finally led to this moment of celebration, and Sarah Johnson, A single mother, sustainable architect, and woman of endless strength, was finally home.